The cold arrives before you see it. You feel it first in your feet. The ground beneath the hide you're sleeping on has turned to stone overnight. Your breath fogs the air inside the cave. The fire is low. You wake. Outside, it is not snowing. It is worse. It is completely still.
For roughly 100,000 years, from about 115,000 to 11,700 years ago, your ancestors didn't just survive winter, they survived an age defined by it. Glaciers covered a third of the Earth's surface. Sea levels were more than 400 feet lower than they are today. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere averaged 10 to 15 degrees Celsius colder than they do now. The landscape your ancestors walked through was almost unrecognizable. Treeless, vast, frozen at the edges, and dangerous at every turn. And yet, they survived. Not just barely. They thrived. They made art. They built shelters. They crossed continents on foot. They buried their dead with handcrafted jewelry. They raised children, formed alliances, and told stories around fires that burned for thousands of years before the first word was ever written down. The question isn't whether they could survive. They clearly could. The question is how. The answer begins with something almost too simple to believe. Fire. Not just fire for warmth, fire as technology. Fire as the first domesticated force in human history. Archaeologist Richard Wrangham, in his 2009 book, Catching Fire, laid out the argument that control of fire wasn't simply useful. It was the hinge on which human evolution itself turned. Cooking food releases significantly more calories than eating it raw. More calories meant more energy available for brain development. Bigger, more metabolically expensive brains meant better problem solving. And in an Ice Age environment, better problem solving was the difference between making it to spring and not. Your ancestors didn't inherit fire. They learned it. They mastered it. They carried it. Evidence from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa suggests that early human ancestors were using fire as far back as 1 million years ago. But it was during the last Ice Age that fire became something more sophisticated, more deliberate, more social. Hearths were built with intention. Stones were arranged to retain heat. Shelters were positioned with their openings facing south to capture whatever weak winter light the sun offered. The hearth became the center of human life. Picture it. You're in a rock shelter, somewhere in what will one day become southern France. The entrance faces south. The back of the cave traps warmth like a hand cupped around a flame. A fire burns in a shallow pit lined with flat stones. Around it, your group. Maybe 12 people, close enough to share body heat, old enough, collectively, to remember where the bison went last winter. This wasn't primitive shelter. This was engineering, and it was the foundation of everything else that followed. But fire alone doesn't explain the full story. Because the Ice Age didn't kill only with cold. It killed with hunger. The same temperature drop that froze the ground replaced forests with something archaeologists call the Mammoth Steppe, a vast, frigid grassland stretching continuously from what is now Spain to Siberia. Steppe simply means flat, open grassland. And that's exactly what this world was. Swept by wind, treeless for hundreds of miles at a stretch. Brutal and open and relentless. But that landscape had one thing going for it. It was full of enormous animals. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, cave lions, giant deer with antlers spanning more than 10 feet from tip to tip. Your ancestors hunted all of them, not recklessly and not alone, but methodically. In coordinated groups, using tools they had spent years learning to make and weapons they had spent years learning to throw. This is where the research of Pat Shipman becomes important. Shipman, a paleoanthropologist who spent decades studying Ice Age survival strategies, put forward a compelling argument. The humans who fared best in the Ice Age weren't simply skilled hunters. They may have been the first people on Earth to form a cooperative partnership with another species, with wolves. The domestication of the dog, or the earliest step toward it, may have begun as far back as 40,000 years ago, deep inside the Ice Age. Early wolves that were tolerant of human presence were tolerated in return. They could track prey through snow that left no visible scent trail for human noses. They could alert the camp to approaching predators. They extended the senses of the group beyond what any individual could manage alone. Your ancestors didn't survive the Ice Age by themselves. They survived it with partners. But let's come back to the cold itself. The raw physical problem of keeping a human body warm when the air temperature drops below -20 and the wind doesn't stop. The answer is one of the most underrated inventions in human history. Tailored clothing. Not just animal skins pulled over the shoulders. Fitted, sewn, engineered garments, designed to trap body heat at the wrists, ankles, and neck, where heat loss is fastest. In 2004, archaeologist Olga Sofer made a discovery that permanently shifted what scientists thought Ice Age people were capable of. While studying fired clay figurines from the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, figurines roughly 26,000 years old, Sofer noticed something extraordinary in the impressions pressed into the clay. Woven fabric, basketry, interlaced fiber patterns that could only have been made intentionally by skilled hands. Your ancestors were weaving textiles at least 26,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. The burial at Sunghir, a site in Russia dating to 34,000 years ago, confirms this picture at a different level entirely. The skeleton of an older man was found, dressed in garments decorated with more than 3,000 hand-carved ivory beads. Beads sewn into patterns that suggest trousers, a long-sleeved shirt, and a fitted cap. Someone spent hundreds of hours carving each one of those beads. Someone else designed the pattern. Someone else sewed them on. This is not a picture of desperate survival. This is a picture of craftsmanship, culture, and deep investment in another person's well-being. Which brings us to the single most counterintuitive truth about Ice Age humans. They were not suffering through history. The paintings at Chauvet cave in southern France, executed 36,000 years ago, discovered in 1994, and still considered among the most technically sophisticated animal art ever found, depict horses, lions, and woolly rhinoceroses with a sense of movement, depth, and life that astonished modern art. Historians, when they first saw them, these were not marks scratched in desperation between moments of terror. These were images made by people with time, with stability, with something to say. Anthropologist James Sussman, who spent years researching modern hunter-gatherer societies and their closest parallels with Ice Age life, found a consistent pattern. Mobile hunter-gatherer groups typically met their basic caloric and material needs in fewer than 20 hours of work per week. The rest of their time was communal, social, often deeply creative. The Ice Age was not an endless emergency. For the people who had learned to read it, the wind direction, the migration corridors, the subtle shifts of season, the body language of prey, it was simply home. So let's reconstruct a day in that world. You wake before sunrise inside the rock shelter. The fire has been kept alive through the night, not by accident, but by rotation. Someone waking in short shifts to add fuel, to keep the warmth from collapsing inward. You eat something preserved from a hunt 2 days ago. Dried meat mixed with rendered fat and pressed dried berries. High caloric density, easy to carry. Exactly what a cold body needs in the first light of a frozen morning. The day's plan forms through conversation, not command. Where did the tracks go yesterday? Which direction is the wind coming from? Who saw signs near the ridge? Children stay close to camp with the elders. The elders hold the knowledge, not in books, which don't exist yet, but in memory, in story, in the accumulated lived experience of everyone who survived last winter. By midday,
the scouts return. With a kill, the camp celebrates and prepares. Without one, the camp adapts and plans. Either way, whatever food exists is distributed equally, not as generosity, but as strategy. In an environment where your life depends entirely on the people around you, hoarding is the most dangerous thing you can possibly do. By night, the fire is the center again. Stories, laughter, the low murmur of voices solving tomorrow's problems in the dark. The Ice Age didn't last forever. Around 11,700 years ago, the climate began to shift. The glaciers retreated. The Great Steppe shrank. The vast herds dispersed. The landscape of your ancestors' expertise began to disappear, and with it, the way of life they had built inside it. What came next? Agriculture, permanent settlements, the beginning of what we call civilization, is often framed as progress. The bones tell a different story. Studies of skeletal remains from the transition between hunter-gatherer life and early agricultural life show a consistent pattern across dozens of archaeological sites. People got shorter. Their bones showed more signs of nutritional deficiency. Their teeth deteriorated. They developed more infectious diseases because living in close, permanent proximity to animals and other humans creates conditions that disease thrives in. They worked more hours for less variety of food. They became, in measurable physical terms, less healthy. The Ice Age was brutal, but the world your ancestors built inside it, mobile, deeply social, ecologically sophisticated, and rich with creative life, was also, in many ways, more fully human than what replaced it. You still carry that world in your body. The reason a fire makes you feel calm in a way you cannot entirely explain. The reason you sleep better when it's cold. The reason your brain floods with satisfaction when you complete something difficult, when you solve a hard problem, when you provide for the people around you. That reward circuitry wasn't built for the office. It wasn't built for the screen. It was built in the Ice Age, shaped by exactly these challenges, tuned to exactly these stakes. The cold didn't make your ancestors less human. It made them more. You wake up and the heat is immediate. The thermostat held through the night. The fire never went out. But somewhere deeper than you can consciously reach, a part of your brain is still listening for the wind.